Thank you, Kasha. Happy Friday, everybody. Is today Friday?
It feels like Friday. It feels like it should be Friday.
It's not Friday. It feels like a Friday. I'm a little off my game. Actually, I'm taking this call thanks to Alex Hesterberg and the Turbonomic team. I'm actually at their location in New York City, and they've been very kind to host us here. So thank you, Alex.
Happy to do it. Happy to have you here.
We're excited. So welcome, everyone. Want to talk about, as Kasha kind of mentioned, this very intriguing concept. I bet if I asked advisory members, how good is your current customer proposal? We probably wouldn't get a resounding, oh my gosh, I love it. You know, that's a constant work in progress. We hear it from a lot of different executives that this is something that they're constantly looking at. Oftentimes, this area has been viewed on the metric of weight, how big the proposal is or how many pages, and that's not necessarily customer-centric. So very relevant topic, and as Kasha mentioned, we have a thought leader on this area in Steve Thompson, and excited to have Steve join us. And he's been very gracious to, in essence, he's got a best-selling book on Amazon around compelling proposals, and each one of the advisory members is going to get a copy of it. So that's a terrific value add from Steve. And Steve, I'm grateful for that gesture, and I know our members will be as well. Let's turn into the agenda, and I'll go through it a little quick overview of what we're going to cover, and then I'll also introduce Steve, and we'll get right to it. So we are going to talk about proposals and what makes a compelling customer proposal. And frankly, one thing that Steve has, and you'll quickly capture this as we talk about his bios, Steve has looked at proposals from both sides of the table. So as an IT buying consultant for companies like Walmart and American Airlines, as well as with the suppliers, he has that unique perspective of both sides of the desk and how that works and what each party needs for it to be a win-win. So he's going to bring that perspective. We're going to talk about why it's so tough right now in selling, why we have to think about the customer in terms of managing their risk and their uncertainty, and then ultimately looking at a way that we can, each time we have an advisory session, we'd love to give you a framework, a tool, or a module that you could then start to apply some of the learnings in your own business. So that's a quick overview of the agenda, and we can jump into a proper introduction of Mr. Thompson. I've known Steve for over 15 years. He had wavy black hair when I first met him.
Red hair.
Steve is, he is, you know, this term expert is used sometimes too much. Steve is truly an expert. I've seen him in very complicated situations and both buyer and seller environments. He just brings a wonderful, unique expertise, 20 plus years in looking at B2B buying and selling. You'll see some of the world-class companies he's consulted with, like FedEx and Coca-Cola, Microsoft and Symantec and Walmart and others. Has a rich history in this area. Also served our country, U.S. Naval. I can't imagine, because Steve's a pretty big guy. I can't see you in a submarine, Steve, for very long.
I got the scars to show it, buddy.
That must be kind of an interesting dynamic. But served our country, U.S. Naval, nuclear submarine officer, quality human being, expert in the field. I won't progress any further, and I'll let him take us through. And really, in our true kind of advisory ecosystem format, we're just going to have a conversation. We're going to have an interactive conversation. Steve will bring and facilitate it, but we really encourage member involvement. And with that, I'll turn it over to Steve.
Well, Chad, thank you very much. And by the way, to everyone, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all, particularly about a topic that I'm really passionate about, and it's this thing called the lowly proposal, which in my experience has kind of been treated like a checkbox exercise. You get to that point in the sales cycle, you got to package up a proposal. And let me kind of start off with a question to you all, because I'd like your perspective. You know, I hear this all the time from my selling clients, and that is, it's becoming so much harder to sell. And my question to you all is, why do you think it is? Why do you think it's becoming much more challenging to sell?
I got my thoughts on this, which is it's at least in the customer landscapes that I'm tending to service, the options, the financial vehicles, the ways to consume the product that often proposals are wrapped around has become really, really diverse. And with that flexibility is the double-edged sword of now you got to find a way to service around it and of course, structure contracts.
Yep. Yep. Because with the advent and the rapid growth of SaaS, that's impacted a lot of things. Even if you're not selling as a service, there's an expectation on the customer side that's been set that we got to deal with. What about other ideas?
I would say that I think there are just so many more decision makers that are part of the process. The collaborative sale just means you have this breadth of relationships you have to develop and people that you have to consider as you try and figure out who you're looking to impact in an organization.
I absolutely agree with you. And by the way, let me put forth, many times we assume as sellers that those people are aligned, and they're not. They have very different agendas, but at the end of the day, we're only doing one deal, right? We're not doing one with operations, another with IT, another with legal, whatever the case may be. So that's added not only complexity, but a tremendous amount of uncertainty, okay, surrounding the opportunity. Other thoughts?
I think customers have been promised a lot. And, I think they're at a point now where they need to be a lot more convinced than taking things, at not even face value, but really getting down into specifics. When you start looking at how do you define ROI and being able to tangibly prove ROI, I think that's at an all-time high. And, we really have to be convincing with our cases.
I agree with you. And by the way, their reluctance is not unwarranted. I'm sure you all have seen the statistics on the number of IT initiatives that are considered successful. Okay. And, the numbers are not good. Okay. They're not good. So there's a history there. But let me kind of put it in a different context here. Let me flip the question. Do you think it's becoming harder or easier for customers to buy? See, that's kind of a different, take on it. And let me give you my perspective on it. All right. I hear all the time from my selling clients, it's like, well, they have access to so much information now about our products, our services, customers that have bought from us, et cetera. And I agree they have. But here's the lament on the buying side. There's now too much information. They're sorting through so much noise, okay? And when you think about it, at the end of the day, the most important question that any buying organization has, they can't Google it. And that question is, who understands me? Who gets me and what I'm trying to accomplish and where I'm trying to go? And so, all of this information on the buying side has made it harder to make a decision. Then you couple that with the number of buying influencers, and many of my buying clients, they characterize this as herding cats, and they don't want to have all these people involved, but they are involved now, particularly when it comes to technology sales. The people that are getting more and more involved are the business. Because in 2019, you look at any typical business and you ask yourself, how critical are the data and the applications to that business on a scale of 1 to 10? Well, they're probably a 12. And the business recognizes that. And that's one reason that they get so engaged. So as we talk about, this thing called the lowly proposal, let me share with you all, when I first started working with buying organizations, they would, as part of my engagement, they would ask me to review supplier proposals. And I literally, got to the point where I really hated that job. And it was a waste of time because I could already tell them every supplier was number one. I don't know how the math worked, but they had great, right? They were all Gartner upper right quadrant, right? World leading, innovative, et cetera. And you read that proposal, and it's all about the supplier, the number of offices they've got, the companies they've acquired, et cetera. And I often ask myself, do they even understand what, the customer's trying to achieve? And in many instances, I felt like I could just change the logos and the proposals would look the same. And so let me give you all a question. What do you think is the purpose of the proposal? And I know this is one of Steve's famous dumb questions. By the way, Chad will tell you I'm famous for it, okay?
That's an easy one. It's to formalize all of the decisions and the ways that they got to those decisions along the evaluation cycle.
Okay, to formalize all the decisions. Okay.
I always thought about the proposal, and I probably put way more time into them in my earlier days when I was writing them and building the templates. I thought the proposal needed to live on beyond me.
Yes.
Like I leave, the proposal stays, and if it can read through clearly and concisely and frame things out, like Peter just said, then maybe I'm working myself out of that initial job. I don't need to be there, but I'm not going to be there. There's so many decisions to make. There's so much competition. Maybe if my proposal stands out, then I don't have to be there swarming the whole time.
And by the way, that's a great vantage point to view the proposal, because now with all these buying influencers there, our champions are having to sell internally.
Right.
And I want you to think about the proposals that maybe your teams are sending today. Are they making it easy for the champion to go sell internally? And when you back up and look at these things, I will tell you it's very, very challenging. It's very challenging. We know our stuff better than they do. And unfortunately, as I said earlier, most of the proposals I see are more or less a checkbox exercise, and they'll run the gamut of a 2-page quote, which is basically a list of SKUs and volumes and prices, which are completely undecipherable to the customer. Or there'll be some young novel, that is loaded with charts and graphs and diagrams and pictures and all this stuff, and kind of follows, the marketing mantra of more is better, more exposures. But when it comes to making a decision, they actually make it harder. And so what I'd like to share with you all is a different approach, I think, to proposals. And I want to tee up what I believe can be accomplished, because I stepped back when I was watching this happen both on the buying side and the selling side, and I asked that question, what is the real purpose of a proposal? And I asked a lot of people that question, and I got answers all over the map. And then, we kind of started honing in on, what could it do for us? So Diana, if you tee up the next slide, please. These are the things that I believe a well-structured proposal can do. They can reinforce trust. Because you see, customers trust us not because of what we know about us, but what we know about them. We can set up the right negotiation. And a big part of my job and the work I do with both selling and buying clients is helping them position and negotiate critical deals. You could be the best negotiator in the world. If you're having the wrong negotiation, you're not going to get the outcomes you want. We can also use it to establish credibility. And, a lot of people confuse credibility and trust. They're closely related, but in this context, think of trust as what do we know about them and what they're trying to accomplish. Credibility is about we've been there and done that. But now I want to surface the fourth bullet point, and this is the one that I feel is really ignored by a lot of selling motions, certainly by most proposals that I see. And that is, there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty inherent in any complex B2B deal. And that uncertainty is never going to go away. And we've got to manage it one way or another. Because we're never going to have perfect information. We can't. We're getting it from multiple buying influencers on the customer side. And as we said earlier, 9 times out of 10, they're not aligned. But we've got to sell into that environment. And then finally, how can we make it easier for the customer to buy and make an informed buying decision as opposed to us selling to them? I mean, how many of you all like to be sold to? Okay, I'm getting a rousing chorus of none.
Silence is compliance.
Right.
Yeah, and by the way, salespeople are the worst people in the world to sell to. I know, I do that, for a living. They are, for people that are supposedly positive and everything else, when it comes to selling to them, man, they're like, whoa, I know all the tricks. Nobody likes to be sold to, but when you need to solve a problem, everybody likes to make an informed buying decision. And so I'm going to talk more about this as we get into it. But not only do we want them to be able to buy, but they've got to sell internally, and we need to help make it easy for them. Now, at the bottom of this slide here, one of the things that I'm going to put forth is we should be putting proposals in front of the customer much earlier in the sales cycle, not at the end, because this is where we can dramatically shape the deal and where it goes. And I'm going to give you an example here in just a second. So Diana, if you'd go to the next slide. All right, this is the basic format that I'm going to show you. It's 7 simple slides. It starts with a cover slide where we're going to present our overall value proposition, because we want to signal the customer, this is what we're here to accomplish for you. And yet when I review particularly technology proposals, these things are an indecipherable string of acronyms separated by commas. And if it's a really big deal, the last acronym is ELA. Okay? Now, if you're the buyer and that's the first thing you see, whether it's in a presentation or in a written proposal, what's the message you're given? This is all about the supplier and the name of the products and services that they want me to pay for. It isn't about me. All right, slide number 2. We're going to validate the outcomes that are critical to the customer and what we believe they're trying to achieve. But then in slide 3, and there's one of my biggest heroes is a gentleman named Theodore Levitt, who was at Harvard University back in the 50s through the late 60s. And he had what I think is one of the most profound insights. And it was this. He goes, people don't buy a 1/4-inch drill. They buy a 1/4-inch hole. See, they pay for the drill. And what I see so often in sales is our people confuse what customers are paying for with what they're ultimately buying. And one of the steps that's missed is we don't take their outcomes and then map them to the critical elements of our offer, the products, the services, the other things, so that they can understand everything we're putting in there is impacting the outcomes that are important to them. Then in the 4th slide, and this, by the way, is where I have most of my clients will just completely throw up, okay? We're going to share with them what's important to us in a deal as sellers. Because after all, the deal's got to work for both parties. And, what I hear is, whoa, Steve, you're way off the reservation here. But let me share with you what's happening on the buying side. In many cases, they're spending an inordinate amount of time trying to figure out where we as sellers are coming from. And of course, as savvy sellers, the last thing we want them to know is that we'd actually like to close the deal, at the end of the quarter, or that we'd rather do a bigger deal. It's like, who are we kidding? If those things are important to us, we tell them and we show them the love we're going to give them. Okay. In exchange for doing that, the 5th slide is simply the past value delivered. And I'll go into more detail when we get to it. The real meat or heart of the proposal is what I call multiple acceptable options. And this is how we're going to manage uncertainty and invite the customer in to buy versus us selling to them. And then the final slide, is basically a rephrasing of the second one. It's the old, tell them what you're going to tell them, tell them what you told them. This is the format, and I've had clients use this on deals from 20K to deals well north of $1 billion. The decision and the sale was made with 7 slides. Now, of course, on a $1 billion+ deal, there's a great big thick contract and everything else. That's fine. I kind of consider that the administrivia. The decision was made and the deal was done. All right, Diana, if you'd flip to the next one. So let's talk about how we can manage risk, how we can allow the customer to buy and sell internally. And I'm going to walk you through an actual proposal from a client of mine. And let me kind of set the stage. Okay, she had one opportunity in her pipeline. She'd been selling on this for 8 months. And as you can imagine, in her world, that was a must-win deal because that was all she had. Unfortunately, of the 3 key decision makers, one of them was the CIO, and that was the primary decision maker. The CIO had left the company 3 months ago. His replacement had just been on board for 2 weeks. She had not met him yet. The other 2 key decision makers, the general manager and the SVP of operations, she'd only met with 1 time early in the sales cycle. Now, the day-to-day people she worked with down at the director level were telling her that they only had a budget, as they say in my world, of $500K. All right? So she was having to deal with that issue. And she had 3 weeks left until the end of the quarter. In fact, it was the end of the fiscal year too, to get this deal in. So this was the situation she was in. And now let me walk you through this basic format and this proposal. All right, Diana, if you go to the next one. This is the title slide. And UFS is a customer. They're in financial services. As you all know, financial services is one of the biggest consumers of technology in the world, at least as an industry. And here's the title slide. Okay, we're going to help them develop and deploy business critical applications much faster than they are today with greater uptime. That's it. And what's the message we're sending these folks?
It's an outcome.
Exactly.
One outcome.
This is the outcome. This is why we're both here. Now, let me tell you that, she had the key decision makers in the room for 1 hour, along with the people that rolled up to them. And this was, used in PowerPoint, but it's designed to be a dialogue, okay, not a presentation. Now, I'm going to kind of go through this rather quickly with you all, but I want you to understand it's really critical because my experience is when you get the key decision makers in one place, in this 1 hour time frame, you're going to learn more than you learn the whole sales cycle as they talk to each other and all that kind of thing. So here's the cover slide. So Diana, if you go to the next one, the very first slide, and typically I like this to be in a build so you can talk about each one, but it's really important that you present this in a humble way. Based on all of our conversations to date, we believe these are the things that are important to your organizations. Right now, you want to be able to deploy new apps within 3 weeks, where it's currently taking you over 4 months. You want to hit 5 nines, okay, in terms of uptime compared to where you are now. You've got 3 critical new applications you need into production before the end of the year. You want to be able to complete updates hot with 0 downtime. Now, UFS, as I said, was in financial services. Think about them as part of the plumbing between credit cards and financial institutions. Ones and zeros run through their business. In fact, that's the only asset they had. As it stood right now, for them to do updates, they had to go down. That cost them a lot of money and a lot of issues with customers. They wanted automated scaling to meet peak customer demand. They wanted their staff to be able to manage the platform by 9 of 17. And they wanted their staff to be able to develop new apps by 12 of 17. So you go through these, and you'll notice some of these are more business-oriented, some are more technically oriented, but remember, we have multiple buying influencers. And we ask them, guys, are we aiming at the right targets? Because if something's changed, it'd be good to find out right now, okay? Or if we've missed something, it'd be good to find out right now. But what we're doing is reinforcing to the customer, these are the targets we're aiming at, which are the outcomes that are important to you. And let me kind of pause for a minute. What I kept seeing is, outcome-based selling has become bigger and bigger. But what I see missing is we don't do outcome-based proposals. And we don't do outcome-based negotiations. And therefore, much of the selling motion and the goodness that comes out of it gets lost, okay, at that point. And for those of you all on the call who are involved in customer success, what if your teams had this much insight as to what we were trying to deliver for the customer, how much easier would it be for your teams to ensure we delivered on this?
We have metrics to deliver against. These are the metrics to measure by. And this is why I know why you said I would love Steve.
Yeah.
It's the outcome and the metrics to measure them by.
Yep.
Love it.
Okay, so remember, if to use the drill and drill bits analogy, these are the holes they're buying.
Yeah.
But now they're going to have to pay for the tools to get there. So Diana, if you'll go to the next slide, this is where on the right-hand side in the blue boxes, the light blue boxes, these are the outcomes that they agreed were important to them. On the left-hand side, these are the critical elements of our offer. And by the way, it's really important this is done as a build. This is where we clearly connect the dots between the key elements of our offer and how they impact the outcomes. Now the customer is not sitting there, you know, when they get a proposal, they're not going, well, why is this in there? Why is that in there? Okay. They agree these things need to be in there. And I call your attention to the last thing at the bottom, the close date. You know, if we can make the close date, not our date in SFDC, but the customer's date in order to meet their deadlines, you're going to find a lot less deal slippage, okay, in your deals. This is a step that I see missed all the time, and I can just share with you on the buying side, you know, when they get this indecipherable list of, you know, acronyms, and all of us have great names of our products and services, here's the question I see being asked by executives when they're trying, our champions are trying to sell this internally. They'll look at this thing and they'll go, well, what is this thing? What does it do? Why do we need this? You know, or why do we need so much of that? And when our champions can't clearly articulate and answer it, you know, suddenly the executives are going, whoa, man, are we sure we're doing the right deal here? So this is a really crucial step. Any questions, by the way, as I'm running through this for anybody?
No, makes total sense. I love the concept.
Okay, well then let's go to the next one. This is where we're going to share what's important to us in a deal. And I know many of you are cringing at the thought, but let me tell you, the first time you have teams do this, they're going to be astounded at the response of the customer. The customer's going to go, wow, we've never had anybody share this, and this is, you know, things we really would like to know. Because remember, a deal has to work for both parties. And so what we're doing is letting them know these are the things that are going to make it work for us. The close date. If this thing slips, it's going to be tough to meet your deadlines, okay? We'd like a longer-term deal with a larger upfront commitment. That's a better deal for us. We can be more flexible in terms of discounting or things that we, services or other things we may put in. We want our platform as your standard platform of choice. We'd prefer a customer success manager assigned full-time, because our experience is when that's done at the outset, small problems get solved before they become big problems. Business critical support is important to us to have in the deal so that we can ensure that you're meeting your uptime goals. We want adequate services to get your platform stood up to support your deadlines. We want an adequate amount of training of both your platform operators and your developers so that you can achieve self-sufficiency. And the last two bullet points have nothing to do about this deal and the size of the deal. They're all about setting up the ongoing long-term cadence. And the first one is what I call customer value reviews on a quarterly basis. And you list the titles, okay? It doesn't make this deal any bigger, but boy, what would it do to set up follow-on work? Okay.
I think it would establish the accountability on the client side to ensure success instead of just putting it all back onto the vendor.
Absolutely, because we're both going to take ownership of it, and we're prepared to come in and self-report. And if these are the outcomes that are important to these individuals, trust me, they want to take that meeting.
Yeah.
Okay? And this is how we become relevant and stay relevant to key decision makers. And then the public visibility. We want to do case studies, conference presentations, reference calls, and things. Okay? So the purpose of this slide is to let them know, guys, the deal's got to work for both of us. This is where we're coming from. And I don't want the other side to guess where I'm coming from. I want to empower them, okay, with that insight so they can hopefully help me get there to a deal that's great for both of us. Okay, Diane, if you go to the next slide. Now, this slide is where I see, you know, whether it's in a slide or a written proposal, what I see is called the NASCAR slide. Okay, and what I mean by that is it is got 50 logos on it. Okay, and while that may seem impressive, your competitors have 50 logos too. And it doesn't help the customer make a decision. It's much easier if you just give them a couple of references of customers who are trying to solve similar problems where you achieve similar outcomes. Now, recall UFS is in the financial services industry. This major retail store I'll share with you is Home Depot. Now, UFS wanted 3 applications into production in less than a year. At Home Depot, we put 50 in production. We had 600 developers trained in using the platform in less than a year, and they're now launching a new app a week. How would you feel if you were UFS? Are we credible?
Yep.
And notice the language. It's important that the language is as close as possible to theirs. And notice we're not in the same industry. By the way, we had 0 penetration at that point into the financial services industry. That's what all the reps keep saying. I need a reference from the same industry. Well, why? If what you did for that particular customer was entirely different than what you're trying to do for this one, how's it relevant? The major telecom here is Comcast. 10 business critical apps in production in less than 6 months. The deployment provisioning 80% faster. 90% improvement in scaling factors. They've had 0 downtime and their internal customer sat improved 43% in 3 months. Just with a couple of really pointed, references here, we make it clear, guys, we've been there and done that. Because both Home Depot and Comcast are huge, complex organizations. And so this is much more impactful and makes it much easier for the customer to feel comfortable than just seeing the NASCAR slides. Questions? Now you're probably asking, well, where did this data come from? Okay. Well, it came from doing customer value reviews with those customers after we won the business. And that's where we captured all of this information. Okay, that's where it was captured. Sorry about that. I thought I'd muted my phone over here. All right, Diana, if you go to the next slide. This is simply a placeholder as a transition. So now let's get to the real heart of the proposal. If you go to the next one. Now let me walk you through this concept of multiple acceptable options. These are 3 options. Any one is acceptable to us, but we believe they have very different value propositions to the customer. They're most effective when you can condense them to just the critical data on one page and put them side by side so it's easy for the customer to scan across and see what's different. The other critical thing, you have to name these as the outcomes or the value props the customer's going to get, so that they understand what that option's about. So let's look at the first one. Okay, this is one business application. And the reason, and let me give you the strategy, I guess, before I go through the 3. Remember, the day-to-day people told us their budget was only around $500K. Well, we had to deal with that, and we dealt with it head on. If you've only got a budget of around $500K, we can give you one of these 2 applications. Now notice these indecipherable acronyms and names. Those are the customers' names of the apps. And you want to use customer acronyms all you can, but not yours, okay? So we heard you, you've only got this much money. If so, we could do this application or that application by the due date. And here's the size of the deal. There's no customer success manager, silver support package. Let me pause for a second. Notice the discounting. For everybody on this call, if your people are sending out proposals, that have a discount in it that's divisible by 5 or 10, okay, you're setting yourself up to get just torn up by procurement. When they see a discounting of 20%, they know it's just a placeholder, okay? And they're going to go after it with great enthusiasm. But when they see a number 18.6%, they're like, whoa, there was some thought that went into that. The same thing, look at the yearly pricing. When I see pricing on proposals that ends in 5 or more zeros, I keep asking myself, what are the odds that everything adds up to exactly that? No, seriously, and that's what procurement does, and that's what the customer does. They know it's a placeholder, and they're going to go after it. But notice when they see a number like this, they're like, whoa, okay, some thought went into that. Then here's the professional services we recommend, and then here's the other items we'd like in the deal. That's the first option. Here's the next one. We can develop all 3 of your critical business apps, and here's what the deal looks like, and you go down through that one. But, and this was part of our strategy because we knew there was a huge follow-on opportunity. And working with their team, we'd already identified 6 apps that they wanted to produce, plus others they wanted to re-platform. So we teed this one up. We didn't expect them to buy it, but what we're doing is seeding the follow-on deal. Now, after she presented this, she turned to the key decision makers as I coached her, and she said, first off, tell me which of these is most attractive to you. And the CIO stood up, went to the screen and pointed at the middle one with the 3 business apps, and he said, this is the one I'm most interested in because these are the commitments my team's made to the business. And then her next question, as I'd coached her, was, how could it be improved? And at that point, the CIO looked down, he goes, okay, customer success manager, I'd like to have halftime on site because this is really important to us. And she said, no problem, we can do it. The pricing will change a little bit. What else? He goes, this is critical to the business. I want business critical support right out of the gate. No problem, we can do that. Again, the pricing will change a little bit. What else would make it better? And he went to the services and he goes, right now with this initial engagement, I'm not sure I want to bite off that much in services. I'd like something more along the level of services you have in the first option, but you need to tell me, are there enough there to ensure that we deliver on the outcomes, okay? And she goes, you know what, let me get back with my people and verify that, and we'll come back to you with what we believe is a minimum you need to get all 3 applications in production. And she goes, is there anything else? And he goes, nope, that's it. What just happened?
He helped her build
customer in control.
Yeah, the customer got to help build the deal. We invited them in to construct the best deal for them. And by the way, when it becomes their deal, these things close fast. They're highly motivated, and it's easy for them to sell internally. She closed this deal in 4 days. Okay, and then if you'll flip to the next slide. This is simply the recap, tell them what you've told them, or tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them, and that's it. That's the 7 simple slides. And this could be done in a slide format. It can be done written. I've got clients that have built an email template and they populate it. They send to the customer, they get on the phone and they have a conversation. And that's the critical thing, that we're having a dialogue with them. So let me pause, okay, and ask you all, okay, think about the proposals that you're doing today. If you'll go to the next slide, Diana, okay, and are we making it easier for customers to buy? Are we managing all that uncertainty? Because again, we're never going to have perfect information, and I don't know what it is about technology sales, but most of the sales reps feel like they always have to have the answer. And I got to tell you, when I got into sales, I was not that smart, and I'd have gotten the hell out of sales if I had to have all the answers. We've got to recognize the uncertainty is there. Things change, and we've got to manage it that way, and we've got to enter into it realizing there's uncertainty. But at the end of the day, we got to get to the best deal at that point in time. So let me pause. That was the basic template. Questions, comments from anybody?
Yeah, so let's open it up to the community. Steve provides a real compelling structure, and we'd love for members to, as Steve referenced, anything around the unique dynamics of this opportunity that you guys want to probe, anything around the larger structure, or what works and what doesn't. We want to give a chance for the members to kind of engage now that they have a framework to review.
I gotta say that there's one comment and one, I guess, glowing review, which is super cool, and I'm going to start using it tomorrow, maybe today. You bridge the gap, Steve, because you mentioned the CVRs, the customer value reviews. I mean, sometimes yes. People call them internally, you call them reviews like QBRs, or they could be EBCs, or if they're not executive, there's some kind of briefing. I always talk about it. It's a time for us to take credit for what we've done, to ask help if we need it. But for us, it's always been laying the bedrock for the secondary deal. And you kind of alluded to it with showing the bigger opportunity, the bigger deal, and kind of laying the foundation or planting the seed for it. And you got the data from the CVRs. But the mapping of the services functions and the services components to the outcomes was a really unique way to do it. And I find that in my proposal building days, and now I've got a team of people that are building proposals, and that's really all they do. Very often we'll talk about staffing resources and kind of talking about what their function would be, but not necessarily tying it to the outcomes. We'll say, oh, there's these initiatives, and I just liked how blunt it was, and I liked that there were multiple lines, and it's a nice way to sort of set the framework that these people, these functions are going to be working on multiple things. In fact, you've got so many things going on, we're giving you a bang for your buck by having one person or one function work on 2 or 3. But it also enforces the criticality, meaning you can't do without this person because they're tied to those 3 or 4 key outcomes. I thought that was really a great view, and I'm totally going to plagiarize it, but I will give you credit. For 6 times, 7 times my idea.
I want you to think too about, the negotiation if they're going to put you in front of procurement after this, because we've linked everything to outcomes. We've now set up what I consider to be the easiest way to negotiate, and that is to negotiate on outcomes. Because as soon as procurement wants to start messing with what's in the deal, we've got to say, okay, guys, we can change this, but now it's going to change the outcomes. And before we agree to it, let's make sure that your internal client, is okay with having an impact on the outcomes. What's happening is now they start negotiating against themselves, and they don't like that. They're like, okay, and they just leave it alone. This is setting up what I call the right negotiation.
So big
comments
here. Go ahead.
No, please go ahead, Pete.
No,
I was going to say that this entire proposal structure is predicated on having credibility about what's being presented, right? Because there's no evidence in this to say that these numbers came from here, et cetera, et cetera. So is that happening from the champion before the meeting is set up? Because that's not always something that's possible, right? So in that case, do you start to introduce some evidence into this? Even just a simple timeline of saying, these have been the past 8 months, and this is how we, arrived at these conclusions. So how do you establish that credibility?
Okay, so let's talk about the credibility. I want to be sure I understand your question, Peter. Was it the credibility of the 2 previous customers that I shared on here and the results we produced for them? Is that the credibility you're talking about, or the credibility of our people just getting in and having this conversation?
The due diligence in getting to your findings, right? If I'm a CIO that's 3 weeks in and I'm seeing a list, here's what you said was important to you. How do I know that there's not 6 things that weren't uncovered and needed to be, or that, this is coming from a jaded eye?
Gotcha. Okay. Well, in this particular instance, it wasn't just the CIO. His internal customers, the general manager and the SVP of operations, were there. And I didn't go through, all the dynamics, but they were chiming in exactly. Yep, that's exactly what we've got to have. Da 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 da. Okay.
Yeah,
And
that
we
was
gathered this information beforehand. Okay, we didn't come up with those outcomes. That was an output, if you will, of the selling motion of a whole host of people that rolled up to those individuals, as well as she'd met with the SVP of Ops and the general manager beforehand. So we felt pretty comfortable we were on target with the outcomes. Okay, but we still needed to validate it.
Yeah, and that was my point about formalizing. I mean, to me, the proposal is a restatement of a lot of due diligence, a lot of findings, right? And to be able to relate it back and say, we worked hard for this.
Yeah, absolutely. But the other thing I want you to keep in mind is when we've got sales cycles that are 6 to 9 months, things change. And what we have to be careful of and cognizant of is that things may change at the last minute. Now, it didn't in this situation, but I've had plenty of them where we've teed up the outcomes and said, is this list right or did we miss something? And a key decision maker will bring something out of left field that our champions and nobody knew about. But that's okay, right? We'll say, wow, we didn't realize that was also important. And we're probably going to need to revise what we've shown you. And we end up revising it and bringing it back. But it didn't disrupt the actual sale and the momentum of the sale. And we had a lot of credibility because we'd already hit, most of the targets. So that whole concept of change is another one that I don't think is adequately addressed because it does happen, throughout these protracted sales cycles.
Yeah, Steve, you actually alluded to one of the questions that you coached the sales rep or the account executive on, and that was a great open-ended question when they were pointing to something in the deal and they said, and you coached her to say, how could it be better, right?
Yes.
These open-ended discovery questions are super powerful. And I know this particular topic was really centered on the proposal and the proposal makeup. Mm-hmm. But I think it would be great to get examples of your open-ended questions as you're coaching your account executives and those teams of how best to do that due diligence and how best to discover. Because that is that's where you get those outcomes, right? That's where you get that initial list where you can say, did we get it? Are we right? Are we on? Are we off?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have a client of mine that's taken all of my work and she's incredibly successful, by the way, as a sales rep. She's going to win Sales Rep of the Year this year. And she goes, okay, Steve, I distilled it down to what, how much, and when. Whenever I'm meeting with a customer, I'm asking them, what is it you guys would like to accomplish? The how much is how are we both going to measure success? What are the metrics, right? And when do you want to achieve this? And is it better if we can do it sooner, et cetera? You're right. There's a whole host of questions that are part of the outcome selling, if you will, motion that raise these. But I think it's really critical that, look, the best salespeople, in fact, I'll go beyond that. The best business people I've done business with around the globe, they don't have all the answers, but man, they always ask the killer questions,
Other questions for Steve?
I think just commentary for me. This is if every proposal for a new client was set up this way. I'm from the customer success domain. The actual building out of success plans and scorecards by which to measure success would be very, very straightforward. So I see a lot of value in this and it continuing through the actual retention of the client and demonstrating value. So I find this really impactful.
Well, Aaron, one thing too that I'm seeing more and more of is that, when you talk about a customer success plan, and by the way, when I build them with my clients, the scorecard's part of it. In fact, it's the first part. The second part's how are we going to get there? Basic Gantt chart, the critical milestones, et cetera. What I'm seeing from more and more buying organizations is they want to see that before the PO. And
that's interesting.
And you're right. One of the reasons one of the things that impacted how this proposal template, if you will, has evolved, was to be a seamless transition now into building the plan. How are we both going to get there? And by the way, one big mistake I see, just as an anecdote on customer success plans, is our teams don't build them with the customer. It's absolutely essential. It's our plan, both of ours.
We're doing. Right.
They have
Yes,
ownership
agree.
too. Yep.
Yep, absolutely agree. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or things? All right, what I'd like to transition to is, Andrew, you had a question? Okay, so what I'm showing you here is a screenshot and a mock-up. Chad and I have been talking about this for a while, and I know you all have access and utilize the ecosystems platform and the VMO tools. You know, I've always had a dream that we could build the proposal into a platform and a tool that allowed it to be more interactive in real time. And while this is a mock-up, I wanted to give you an idea of how we could do this with the options, because the options to me are the heart of this particular approach. It has humility attached to it. We're managing the uncertainty, the risk. I'll share with you, by the way, one of my clients is masterful. They'll shine the options up on the board, and the LCD is in a boardroom. It's shining on a whiteboard. They give the customer the marker and say, go up and tell us which one you like the best. And their deals are really complicated, by the way. And then they'll say, how could it be improved? And they'll say, well, we'd like to decrease this. Well, we can do that, but you know, we'd have to change this. What else? By the time they're done, they take a picture of it and they tell the customer, okay, tomorrow you'll have a formal proposal from us with everything we just agreed to. And their customers love it because they got to build the deal. And that's what I think an interactive platform could allow us to do in real time. And if you'll flip, let's say in this case, the customer does hone in, as I shared with you in this case study, the middle option. If you'll go to the next screen, Diana, this is how we could take that option and build in the interactive sliders and things and let them adjust it right there in real time. And I think this could be incredibly powerful. Chad, you got any comments on this?
Yeah, well, I think Steve has done such a nice job. I mean, and this is to the dialogue with Steve and Alex about how the very nature of having more of a conversation than a presentation establishes credibility. You know, that great piercing question of how can we make this better, and then allowing that executive. This is really kind of helping the members do what we would consider co-creating a proposal. You know, taking the old mindset of a proposal being something I do to a customer and making it something I do with a customer. And to Steve's earlier point, maybe even injecting this a little earlier in the engagement where we can start to shape and craft what looks good from both sides. And having that transparency to say, you know, Steve's hit this point a lot, which I love, is it establishes a lot of transparency when you say, this is what good looks to me. Let's not let that be something I have to hide or protect, but as a provider, as a supplier, this a reference, you talking at our next customer event is really important. I think the customer appreciates that level of transparency, and in the right discussions, that will help align to it over time. So this is something that the members will have access to, and just like Alex is piloting some stuff on collaborative planning in terms of business reviews, any member can start to pilot this. We'd like to kind of shape it with some folks, but we have an underpinning in the platform to do so. And so we would just say that if there's interest in kind of taking this interactive proposal concept further, please contact Kasia, who's our director of the advisory ecosystem. Her email is right there on the screen, and we'll set up time to show you what's kind of in place and get your best thinking on how we can look to scale this in some pilot opportunities for you and see what does it do in terms of changing the quality of the negotiation or the conversation.
Yeah, and I would love your all's insights and perspectives on this, because we've talked about building something like this for a while, and I think the time is now, okay, to get this out there.
What's interesting is it dawned on me before, and I kind of forgot to say it, how often when you're doing a deal with a customer, and you're finally through the deal, do they refer to it as a partnership? You know, like, or when they're evaluating vendors, we're not looking for vendors, we're looking for partners.
Yes.
Flip to say, well, in the spirit of partnership,
Yes, you're right.
let's build this together.
Right.
I know sometimes it becomes a dirty word. It's like partnership means discount, but in reality, what you've done is demonstrate a way that it doesn't mean discount. It actually means joint building.
Nice.
Exactly. And the key point here, Alex, and I'll share with you all, our people, that word partner ought to be stripped from our people's lexicon. No, I'm serious, because as soon as customers hear it, man, they want to throw up. If you haven't earned the right yet, okay, they have to tell you you're a partner. And this is a way we can quickly start earning that right.
Agreed.
Excellent feedback. Any other last questions? What I do want to make sure everybody's aware of is Steve's new book that you will each get a complimentary copy of. It is a bestseller on Amazon right now, and as you probably can tell from our time together, Steve is very passionate on this issue, brings that unique perspective of buyer-seller, and we're hopeful with both the content in the book and also ongoing member dialogue and discussions. You know, if somebody wants to take advantage of the interactive platform, we'd love them to kind of come back and represent to the group some early findings or some of the impacts, as Steve said, get some insights. But we'll have a call to action to make sure everybody gets a copy of his new book that's out there. Cool. And now, final point for us is our agenda going forward. So we had a great session today. Steve, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your years of experience, your structure. You did it in the confines of an actual example, which is always pragmatic, and I think the members appreciate. And we'll make sure Steve's part of the LinkedIn group, guys, so constant source of ongoing dialogue or interest that you have around proposals. I know he'd be happy to extend and continue the dialogue. We do have one of our members who's the general manager at HP going to be talking about value realization in September. We've got a presentation from Forrester, formerly Serious Decisions, now Forrester, around sales intelligent platforms. Steve Silver is going to come in and educate us on what platforms are out there and what is seen as kind of provocative and best of breed. And then we're also working on a track towards the back half of the year on taking this outcome proposal, which is kind of a nice segue from what we talked about today, to an outcome-based agreement. And we actually have members that are now contracting and putting terms into their contract around achieving some mutually identified KPIs and outcomes. And we thought that would be provocative for everyone to see and hear and experience. So that'll be to be scheduled going forward. So we always like to end on time. We're right at the hour. Thank you, Steve. Thanks all for attending. Remember, there'll be a video summary of our session today in full as well. So you'll have the entire, if you need to share it with others in your company. And feel free to reach out to Kasia if there's interest in piloting some of the interactive proposals we've discussed.
Chad, thank you, by the way, for the opportunity to chat with everybody. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks all. Wish you all a good day.